And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Naveen.
Thank you, Nalini. It's so great to be here with you all today for this discussion. I don't often get a chance to tell my story, and I know we all have stories and journeys that we've been on. So I'm just grateful for the opportunity to share with you my humble perspective on the journey I've been on as a person and a professional. To orient you to my comments, I'm going to start by sharing my perspective very briefly on the modern history of agriculture. I'm going to weave in my own background into that story, and then I'm going to talk to you about the company that we've built here at Terraviva and what we're trying to do with our business. So is it okay, Nalini, for people to jump in with questions at any time, or is this sort of like a I talk kind of thing?
Kind of like you talk kind of thing.
Okay, I'll do it. And if you have questions, just put them in the chat bar, and I'll try to kind of weave them into my description of what our perspectives are here at Terraviva and my personal perspectives. So to start, I want to put a number out there: 200 million acres. 200 million acres. So an acre is 46,500 square feet. I don't know where all of you find yourselves in right now, but I don't live in that kind of a square footage personally. 200 million acres is the number of acres we grow of corn and soybeans in the United States every year. We actually grow about 100 million acres of each crop. 200 million acres is the size of Denmark, the Netherlands, and Switzerland combined, all of the landmass of those three countries. We grow 200 million acres of these crops each year, and that's the only crop we're growing on each one of those acres. So 100 million acres of corn, 100 million acres of soy. But if you go back 100 years ago, that was not what was happening in the Midwest. Sure, we did grow corn and we did grow soy, but on that very same acre of land, we also grew crops like oats and lentils and peas and wheat and rye. We grew a variety of things on every single acre. And that was a system of agriculture that was much more fragmented and much more diversified. And you had a lot more farmers as well. And the modern history of agriculture really started, in my opinion, right around World War II. After the war, capitalism obviously triumphed over fascism, and the capitalist ways started to inure into the food and ag system. So what we began to see was a focus on specialization and a focus on optimization instead of diversification. The best example of this is the meat and livestock industry. Prior to World War II, you had a very distributed, fragmented system. You had a lot of farmers and farming families raising animals and subsequently producing them for meat. After World War II, we came up with the idea that it would be better to centralize those animals into a confined space. And rather than letting them go around and graze in a field, it would be better to bring the food to them. And not the food that they were historically eating, like grass or bugs, but corn and soy. That carbohydrate protein powerhouse that we could feed to those animals in a confined space, and we could get up to an economic weight and a market product faster than what had historically been done. So if you're a glass half full kind of person in our space, you would say, generally speaking, this was a good thing. You would say that as a result of the specialization, as a result of farmers being told not to grow a lot of things on their fields, but to grow only one thing, and there'll be supplies with their inputs and somebody will buy their crop. If you were a glass half full kind of person, you would say this was good because as a result of specialization in the agriculture and food industry, we've got a lot of affordable and abundant food, generally speaking. If you were a glass half empty kind of person, and to be clear, the glass is half empty, you would say that there were a lot of consequences to this system, particularly around climate and inequality. So on the climate side, as a result of the modern agriculture system, agriculture accounts for 25% of all of global greenhouse gas emissions. And livestock production, corn and soy and feeding animals, is the overweight fraction of those carbon emissions. Also on the climate side, because we no longer grow a lot of diversified crops on a given acre of land. In fact, Frank, about 5 crops account for 75% of global agriculture production, right? Because we no longer have a diversified growing base on an acre. When climate change has been happening, when we've had more droughts and more floods and more erratic weather, these crops have done worse, right? On the inequality side, there's also 2 things that have happened. Yes, we have abundant and affordable food, but it's arguably low in nutrition. And many people point to our current food system as the root causes of obesity and diabetes that we have worldwide. And more often than not, those conditions affect low-income communities. If you think about it from the farming perspective, farmers haven't done any better. Even though we've made more abundant food and we've made it more affordable, farmers have not benefited. They have not economically grown up in the system. So this is the modern history of agriculture that I found myself in now about 22 years ago, when Nalini and I first met and we were in college together. I was in between my junior and senior years of college, and I was working in West Africa for the summer. And one of the projects that I was working on for the US State Department was around chronicling US government funded agriculture projects. I had no agriculture experience. I'm the child of immigrants who worked in engineering and medicine. There's no farming in my background. I actually ended up in West Africa because of my personal interest, my educational interest in post-colonial activities happening by the French and the Dutch in West Africa. And I found myself on a particular occasion in the northern part of the country of Togo, right by the Burkina Faso border. And I was visiting some smallholding farmer families, and to my shock, they were growing corn and soy. That is not the food they eat. They were growing corn and soy because that was a marketable commodity. They could grow it, they could sell it, and then they could essentially have the money to buy other food they wanted to buy and other durable goods. So just a little bit more about myself. After that internship, I came back, finished up my time in my degree, my undergrad degree, and basically all of my professional experiences were at that point were working in the public sector. Everybody I talked to in the public sector by the year 2000 had told me I should not go work in the public sector. I should go work in the private sector because there were going to be emerging opportunities for impact and positive social change through the private sector, perhaps more so than the public sector. I had no experience in business, but I was fortunate to work for 8 years as a management consultant at 2 different firms, and I got really great exposure into a whole variety of areas: biotech, obviously agriculture, natural resources, some other areas. And because I had no formal business training and I was very eager to get it, I decided to do an MBA, and I ended up at University of California at Berkeley in the year 2007. Very exciting times. 2008, of course, we all know, was the election of Barack Obama. And there were 2 major things happening in the Bay Area and on Cal campus at that time. The first was a huge focus on climate. And I have to admit, prior to getting to Cal, I had no real knowledge of climate other than what I read or I watched within Inconvenient Truth and things like that. But I did get a chance to study climate science, to understand thermodynamics and greenhouse gases, and to conclude for myself personally and intimately that climate change was a really, really big problem. The other thing that was happening was, force of being in Silicon Valley at that time was the huge emphasis in technology. I'll call it lowercase t, not higher uppercase t. So in that bucket, I would put not just the internet and software, but I would put things like blockchain and 3D printing and genomics tools that were abounding. And I became really interested in the interface of these two things, how we could resolve the challenges with climate change with technology. There were some obvious examples at the time, things that we almost take for granted now, like solar, right? And I was particularly fascinated by how technology could democratize and decentralize solutions to climate change. So solar is a great example of how you can put some solar panels on your house and you can effectively become an electric utility. Another area that interested me was biofuels because of my interest in agriculture. The idea that as a farmer, you're always going to have a part of your land that won't be good for food crop production, but you could grow something else that could be used as a low carbon fuel for energy. I was really interested in that. And so it was late in my time in my MBA program that I was introduced to some investors who were looking at a crop that was of interest for biofuels. And this is where the story of Terviva begins. Let me first tell you about the crop, and then I'll tell you about the company. So the crop is a legume species of tree. Legume meaning two things. It produces beans on the tree, almost like an almond or another kind of nut crop, but these are actually beans, pretty similar to soybeans. The other part of a legume crop that's interesting is that they fix nitrogen, meaning they have a very unique mechanism where they can pull nitrogen out of the air and they can actually put it back in the soil. And nitrogen is one of your most important nutrients, obviously, in growing any kind of crop. So this legume tree is able to make its own nitrogen and effectively produce nitrogen in the form of this proteinaceous bean. The tree has a long history in Eastern medicine. It's featured in the Ayurveda. It's featured in Chinese medicine because the beans from this tree, while inedible and bitter, had certain medicinal properties. And for that reason, it was brought around the world through the subtropics. It was brought into Polynesia, into Africa, believe it or not, into the United States, because it had medicinal value in ancient cultures. And because the tree, being a nitrogen fixer, it almost took care of itself when you grew it. When I first met the tree, it was on a very short trip to India, and I observed how it was prevalently planted all over in rural communities. It was valued by these rural communities for these medicinal properties, and it was a tough tree that you could grow in your field and not have to take care of too much. And it provided a little bit of economic value as a result. And the idea of Terviva, the company that we started, was really pretty basic. It was, could we take the best parts of this tree, the fact that it's hardy, the fact that it's low input, the fact that it could be a part of a field, but not the dominant part of a field? And could we do a couple of things? One, could we stabilize the yields? It was very erratically yielding. It didn't consistently yield a lot of beans across all types of agricultural conditions year to year. And the second thing we wanted to do is see if we could upgrade the value from these interesting but small markets like Ayurvedic medicine and into more mainstream agriculture usage. So the company formed in 2010, basically as a one-man band. And I'm going to fast forward to a lot of history and a lot of luck. We've been able to take the crop and the company to its promise. We are now growing Pongamia trees in degraded agriculture conditions. We're producing stably a lot of these beans year to year. In fact, interestingly, we're producing 4 to 5 times more beans per acre than what you can get from soy with far less input. And because it's a tree, you get a lot of carbon sequestration as a result of growing it. And we've been able to use natural food processing to de-bitter these beans and to make them usable in food applications. So it takes a while and it takes a lot of really smart people and patient investor capital to do this. But we've basically been able to take this one instance of nature and move it into a system that requires us to not just reduce the carbon footprint of agriculture, but to actually regenerate or reverse the carbon footprint of agriculture. And we've been able to give farmers an economic opportunity, a diversification opportunity that they haven't historically had. And, we've got a lot of work to do, but if you sort of sit there and you think about what's going to change where we're at, it's got to be a lot of things, but we've got to start all the way back on the field. So the last observation I'll make is that consumers play a really big role in changing our food and ag system. And one of the things that's been most beneficial to our company has been the plant-based foods movement. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with it. Probably some of you are consumers of plant-based foods. We need to extend, to democratize, and to decentralize that opportunity as well, right? I'll share a story about when I was talking to a major food producing company about launching a plant-based food brand off of our vegetable oil and our protein from these beans in the US. And that particular executive, to show where we're at, was equally thinking about how such a product would land in Africa, in India, in China, in Southeast Asia. So I think we're on the cusp of something really, really special. I'm excited to talk to you all and to join the discussion around what a future of food could look like. That's not just, healthier, but also restorative of our climate and provides opportunities for everybody. And hopefully that wasn't too confusing or weird. So ask questions, please.
That was terrific, Naveen. Since Naveen has offered to answer any questions, feel free to drop in something into the chat. We'll give it about a minute in case anyone has any questions. Otherwise, we will proceed as normal into our breakout rooms. We will be dropping all the details for Naveen into the chat as well. Okay. Question for you, Naveen. What is your view on urban farming?
I really love the idea of farming in urban areas on plots of land. I think that's a fantastic opportunity to bring diverse forms of food into urban communities. I'm a little bit of a wait and see person when it comes to vertical farming. So the idea of building warehouses where you grow a lot of produce indoors. I'm not quite sure whether that's going to be very, cost or energy efficient. I don't know if we'll be able to produce product that are in the center of the plate, so to speak. I know you can make herbs and leafy greens from it, but people need sort of traditional nutritious calories. And I'm not really sure how democratizing that is. So I'm a big fan of urban farming. When you talk about literally farming, I'm a little bit of a wait and see person when it comes to vertical farming.
And the name of the tree?
Yeah, it's called, I deliberately didn't want to throw people off with that. It's called Pongamia. It goes by a lot of different names. It's exciting to be working with a crop, an artifact of nature that could, literally be grown very sustainably. I want to highlight, it's not the only crop that's like that, right? As we all know, as humans, we have a bad habit of basically working on a couple of things at once and making everything out of it. There's a lot of crops of nature that could be like Pongamia. We just like it in particular because it provides both plant protein and vegetable oil off of one source. Yes, we are definitely going to be marketing it in the US. We expect to make an announcement in the next month with one of the top global CPG food companies on products of theirs that are going to feature Pongamia protein and vegetable oil.
So the plant protein that you're talking about, is that protein as an ingredient, as in like some of these synthetic meats? Is it a protein powder supplement? What's the delivery format for the protein?
Yep, it's a great question. You often have to play to the inherent functionality in the protein. Different kinds of proteins have different kinds of properties, like solubility or gelling ability or foaming, so forth and so on. We're excited because our protein is really well suited to liquid applications. So beverages, yogurts, and things of that nature. And I personally like that because I think that's a globally accessible form factor. Plant-based meats is really big here. I think it's really fantastic. It doesn't play in every part of the world, but I'm a believer that plant-based dairy is a pretty ubiquitous product globally.
Thank you, Naveen, for being willing to address a few questions.